The year is 1992. Sega is looking around and seeing that Nintendo has completely dominated the little guy market, so they decided to make their own little guy. That's right, we're talking about Sonic's best good buddy, Tails the Fox. Miles Prower, also known as Tails, first debuted in Sonic 2, taking on his typical role at the Hedgehog's side. But we are not here to talk about that game today. Instead, I wanted to take a look at Tails' first solo venture, the 1995 Game Gear release, Tails Skypatrol. For everyone except the 10 people who used this thing back in the day, the Game Gear was Sega's answer to Nintendo's Game Boy, and it sold, not as well. But something neat is that Sega did the backlit screen thing 8 whole years before Nintendo did it with the Game Boy Advance SP. However, this did lead to quite a large handheld. I've never used one of these, but it just seems like it had to feel like holding a brick, kind of like the 90s version of the Wii U gamepad. Back to the software at hand, Sega decided to take a strange creative route with this game by making it an auto-scroller as opposed to the traditional 2D platformer Sonic had been known for so far. Tails Skypatrol was originally a Japanese-only release until it was added to Sonic Adventure DX as an unlockable minigame, as well as part of the Sonic Gems collection, which is just a compilation of classic Sonic games released for the GameCube. It seems like the game came out to mixed critic reviews because while it can be fun to play at times, the difficulty can spike incredibly quickly. That and the game is incredibly short. There's only 5 stages, and a blind playthrough of those only took me about an hour and 45 minutes to complete. And that is factoring in that I had no idea how the game worked at first and died at least 50 times throughout the playthrough. For this playthrough, I used the Sonic Gems collection release with a GameCube controller. And while I sometimes wanted to slam my head through the drywall, it carried me. Oh my... I overall enjoyed my time with the game and wanted to dedicate some time to talk about Tails' quirky first solo adventure. According to the original Japanese manual, the story of the game takes place some point after Sonic 2 because Tails has met the Blue Blur but seems to be aimlessly flying on a mini vacation of sorts. On his travels, Tails stumbles across a random island that he decides to investigate. Upon touching down on the isolated landmass, Tails sees that the island's native population has been turned into crystals by the evil witch that rides in a minecart named Witch Cart. Very creative, I know. Regardless, it is Tails' duty to defeat the witch and her evil henchmen known as the Witch Carters and save the day. It's a pretty basic and nonsensical story, but they were working with the limitations of the Game Gear, so I can understand it. I do wish they put a bit more effort into Tails' first solo adventure. At the bare minimum, maybe table the villain's name for just a little bit longer, I don't know. Either way, let's get on to the gameplay. Gameplay-wise, this is certainly not the expected gameplay for a Sonic-adjacent game. From the moment you hit start, Tails is flying, and God forbid he ever touches the ground because... he dies. As I mentioned earlier, this game is an auto-scroller, so you cannot stop Tails from moving at all. Luckily, being a Game Gear title, there aren't many buttons to press. You can press forward or back to increase or reduce Tails' speed, and press up or down to do exactly what you think they would. Meanwhile, the A button is used for the only non-movement control option that you have, which functions as an attack. The attack consists of Tails throwing a ring that can clear some obstacles, interact with certain parts of the stage, or defeat enemies. Speaking of enemies, as I mentioned earlier, the biggest enemy is the terrain. The only way to lose a life is by either hitting the ground or a wall. The standard enemies can damage you, but instead of losing rings like your typical Sonic-based experience, the damage sends Tails into a free fall toward the bottom of the stage, and if you hit the floor during this, you lose a life like usual. It took me longer than I care to admit to realize that you can get out of this free fall by mashing A, which can actually be pretty helpful because it gives Tails a few seconds of invincibility frames and a short burst of top speed. Another thing you have to pay attention to is the Tails colored bar at the top left above the life count. This meter represents the energy Tails has left to fly. It constantly depletes throughout the level, and if it runs out, you enter a free fall similar to when you get hit by an enemy, except you can't cancel it by mashing A, so you're as good as dead. However, Tails can replenish this gauge by picking up his very favorite mint candy that is lying about the various stages. Also, for the rest of this video, I will be referring to this resource as Tails' Fly Juice, and I will be taking 0 questions about that. There are 3 other power-ups that Tails can collect, which is the 1-up sign, which gives you another life, the crystal blocks, which increase points, and the invincibility sign that makes Tails invulnerable for a few seconds. There are several set pieces that Tails can interact with to a wide degree of effects. First, the most common are these yellow and blue poles, which generally send Tails flying forward in order to get a burst of speed, which is sometimes helpful, but sometimes will just get you killed. There's also these 10-ton blocks that cause Tails to fall incredibly fast until you let go or hit the ground. Next, we have these balloons that slow the auto-scrolling down and allow for more precise control of Tails. These are usually used to conserve fly juice and climb upward in narrow hallways safely. Finally, we have the minecart, which Tails can attach to and ride at a moderate pace for a while to conserve fly juice. Scattered around the level are floating bells that function function as this game's checkpoints, and as long as you have another life, you get respawned at that location. A very nice quality of life feature this game has is that the game overs only start you back at the beginning of the stage, as opposed to some classic 2D games which make you start all the way from the beginning of the game. If you're an expert in this game and I got something wrong about the mechanics, please let me know, because I had so much trouble figuring this game out on my own and finding information online about it. Taking a look at the graphics, this game actually looks pretty good for its age and aspect ratio. Tails looks very cute and determined, and the environments look pretty detailed for what they were working with. Sometimes standard enemies can be a bit hard to spot, but the bosses have big-headed sprites that stand out and feel unique compared to generic baddies. My biggest graphical gripe is that it's very hard to tell what are walls and what Tails can fly through at times. Like, what's the difference between this wall and this one? This game is actually really pretty and vibrant with this great use of colors, especially with the larger screens of the re-releases. Tails is bright and colorful and contrasts well against the stage backgrounds. Alright, so now we know how the game plays and that it looks good, but how does that all fit in with the levels? We start off in a tropical destination known as Training Area. Why it doesn't have a real name, I couldn't tell you, but regardless, this stage is relatively simple and is meant to teach you the basics of the game. However, I am very dumb. A clean playthrough of this level should really only take about 1 minute, but I had absolutely no clue what I was doing, so it took me about 16. The two biggest time sinks for me were the aforementioned freefall canceling that I hadn't figured out yet, and these rotating walls that have a strange hitbox that took me a while to figure out. At first, I thought the whole thing was impassable, but it's only when the wall is at its skinniest during the rotation, which should have been obvious, but even so, I died way too many times to it. The stage has a very fun and bright look to it that definitely is meant to look just like Green Hill, with the striped grass, the palm trees, log bridges, and checkerboard rocks. The music is a simple, lighthearted loop that only sticks around too long if you listen to it for 15 more minutes than you're supposed to, like me. Overall, a pretty fun introductory level that well demonstrates most of the game's core mechanics. Next up, we have our first full area, Rail Canyon. No, not that Rail Canyon. This Rail Canyon. Rail Canyon features a rocky background with a few trees and a ton of hallway-shaped caves. The music here gives me the same vibes of a sped-up version of Yankee Doodle or some other old folk tune. I'm not a big fan of the design of this stage, as it's just swarming with enemies, particularly the beginning section with these weird blue bird things. I'm also not a fan of the way some of these hallways just abruptly lead you into a steep wall where you need to slow down and hold up immediately or you won't make it to the door in time. Coupled with that, there are a few paths that have these orange switches that both need to be flipped to open the wall that will kill you otherwise. The worst part of this being that if you don't hit both and actually go down the path that the door is, there's just a point of no return where your fate is sealed for about 5 seconds before you actually take the damage. A typical playthrough of this stage only takes about 3 minutes on a solid playthrough, but my liquid playthrough took about 10 minutes. Making your way to the end of the stage leads us to our boss fight with the first witch carter, the flying motorbike riding wolf named Haka Wolf. The boss fights in this game are all kind of the same and are super simple. They all just progress along a fixed path shown by the cart path below, and then Tails just has to spam the attack button to damage them until they go down. Damaging the bosses also slows them down, which makes it easy for Tails to just spam the A button and hit them while moving slowly. The music of the boss fights is also usually just this stage music sped up a bit, so it's not really very inventive there either. The bosses can damage you by throwing projectiles and by colliding with you, but much like the standard enemies, the only way Tails can lose is by touching the ground or running out of fly juice. And even if either of those do happen, they always put a checkpoint right in front of each boss section, so as long as you have another life, you'll start with plenty of fly juice on the next attempt. Once the wolf is sufficiently hocked, Tails carries him off to the Great Beyond and moves on to our next area. Next up is the questionably named Ruined Wood area, when this is clearly designed to be a mineshaft cave when the name sounds like it should be some sort of forest level. Even weirder is that about halfway through the stage, it just transitions to this weird castle theme with these rainbow blocks and the music suddenly changes, but it's still not what I would call a ruined wood. The music seems to be going for a more menacing vibe in the intro, but then kind of gives that all away by looping the same boop effect for the 45 seconds after. I'm not a big fan of this stage in general, as it relies on a lot of beginner traps to lengthen the stage, such as these green drills in general that can be tricky to dodge in time if you don't know that they're coming. As well as this segment where you have to ride the minecart here, but also hang onto the minecart long enough that it drops you down this narrow elevator shaft that you can't navigate normally. But not too long, because the minecart leads to a bottomless pit that instantly takes you out. With a special mention going to this one particular blue pole that launches you right into a set of green drills, because fuck you and your happiness. Not to mention it adds my least favorite obstacle in these mud balls, I guess. These things just kind of materialize out of nowhere and you guessed it, kill you, but there's a far more obnoxious instance of these and I'll talk about that later. Typically a deathless run of this stage will usually take about 3 minutes, but it took me about 26 to beat this stage due to the aforementioned beginner traps. When we arrive at the end of the wood, we face up against the second witch carter, Behringer. This Ursine foe is riding a flying rocket, and yeah, it's exactly the same as Wolfie Boy. Set path, spam rings into the back of his head, and carry him off to the depths. After banishing the bear, we take to the sky for our next area, Meadow Island. which is themed around flying airships, which means we continue the confusing naming conventions of the stages because we are nowhere near the island here. Not really sure where these ships came from or who they belong to, as we never see the whole ships or go inside of one, so it's just some random jutting ship parts strewn about in the shape of a level. Confusion aside, the background is a very pretty blue color, and the clouds being on both the top layer and the background are nice set pieces. The music here is a nice short tune with a floaty feeling that I think fits very nicely with the sky and cloud aesthetic of the stage. Metal Island is by far and away the easiest stage of the whole game. The layout is super open and has almost no tight corridors at all. The stage is packed with enemies, but since it's so open, you can recover really quickly from any damage that you take. There's also tons of mint candy around, so you don't really have to worry about running out of fly juice either. If anything will convince you that this is the easiest stage, even a no-hands Larry like me only died about once or twice and took about 5 minutes to beat this stage, where a deathless run only takes about 4 minutes. At the end of the stage, we have probably our most unique boss fight in the game with the next witch carter Karatia. I say the most unique because of the aforementioned open stage design, as instead of a set rail path, we have basically the same geography of the level itself, which by extension makes this the easiest of the 4 boss fights as well. I like Karatia's design the most because she looks like something out of Looney Tunes, and she's just a rabbit inside a flying carrot mobile. Anyways, Tails opens fire with his ring and carries her to the big carrot patch in the sky, and moves on to the final area, Dark Castle. The final stage begins with us outside you guessed it, Dark Castle. And in the background, we got a strange city skyline and colored block outlines for some reason. The stage changes between this outside theme and indoor castle theme and this weird sewer screen theme, I guess you would call this. The stage is honestly an amalgamation of all the worst aspects of every stage. The obscene amount of enemies from Rail Canyon and Metal Island, as well as the tight corridors and beginner traps of Ruined Wood. Bringing back the mud balls from earlier, there's an instance of these with a very long hallway of them that I died to so many times until I figured out that you can just speed along a very specific pathway and just avoid them completely. But this section was way too much of the playtime on this stage. Speaking of playtime, if you have basic motor function, this stage should take about 5 minutes, but don't. One of my biggest gripes about the stage compared to the others is the lack of checkpoints. Usually each stage has about 3 to 4 spaced out evenly, but for Dark Castle, there are no checkpoints until about 80% of the way through the stage, and then like 4 after that. So if you die before that, then you might as well just die again and get the game over and start with more lives on your hopefully more successful run. Speaking of torturous playtime, the music. Oh god, the music of this stage. The music here is a very short, high-pitched, fast-tempo anxiety inducer. It's just such a grating sound that after 40 minutes of playing, the level started to drive me and my Twitch chat insane. I'll just be honest, this stage absolutely beat my ass, but eventually we finally battle our way through the winding halls of the castle so we can finally confront the big bad, Witch Cart. Is this the boss? Oh, thank God! I bet you're hoping this would be more exciting because it's the final boss, but well, that's too damn bad, because it's exactly the same as the others. Tails just has to peg the crone in the back of the head with the ring for a bit and carries her off into the abyss as the credits begin to roll. The credits is just a gif of Tails flying over a starry night background testing out his emote wheel as the staff credits run under him. And there you have it, the whole Tails Skypatrol experience. I really wanted to put a spotlight on one of the more wacky parts of the Sonic franchise's history that I'm sure not many fans, especially young ones, even know exists. Certainly not a fantastic game, but honestly I ended up having fun with it towards the end despite my struggles in Dark Castle. This video was certainly shorter than the last one, but thanks for sticking around to the end of a video about me rambling about a 30-year-old game that barely anyone has played. I'm having a lot more fun creating this more structured type of video essay content, so I hope you'll support me on the future ones as well. And if you have any suggestions for any future games you want me to make a video on in the future, please let me know in the comments below. And if you could, please remember to like the video and subscribe to see my future content. Once again, thanks for sticking around and listening to my dumb ramblings, and I hope to see you in the future.